Hi writers, I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about reading in college. And this is important because the more we read, often the better we get at recognizing patterns of writing that are strong and are able to then emulate those patterns. And you're asked to do a lot of reading in college, and sometimes that content is engaging and sometimes it's not. And you might be quizzed on it in certain classes or subject areas. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you can strengthen some of your reading skills. So one thing you want to start with is understanding that what you're reading is called the subject or the content. It is what the piece is about. And there are different forms of reading that you can do, and this deals with how the author or authors write the piece. And when you read something, especially when you're asked to read critically, you are asked to engage with that reading. So you're asked to be active in it and to analyze it as you go. And you are encouraged to question it. Remember that books and essays are written by people, and people are full of their own perspectives, biases, and experiences, and they often are promoting a specific viewpoint that you can or cannot disagree with, and that is up to you as the reader. So whereas maybe in K-12 we were just given a text and asked to read it and absorb it and take it as factual, when you get into college and university, you're asked to be more critical of those pieces. You're asked to ask questions about, well, who wrote this, and when did they write it, and what was it in reaction to, and what are they trying to promote, and do I agree with this? When you get into the different types of forms, you're looking at different rhetorical modes or genres of writing. And for English Composition 1, you'll be asked to use a couple different modes or genres. The first one that you're doing is an extended definition. And the definition is explaining something, but it's not just the literal dictionary definition. It is an expanded definition that you write based on your own thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. So for each of you, if you all chose to write about happiness, that would be different. Your definitions would differ based on your own personal values and experiences. So as you begin to read, and you might find that you do want to do some reading for this particular essay, we will certainly be doing more as we venture into essays 2 and 3. You might want to brush up on some articles on hygge or happiness. And I have linked one in your Week 2 folder for you to take a look at that is published by NBC. So as you begin to read an article or a book or an assignment that you've been given, give yourself some time. If you're not used to reading a lot, I recommend setting some times throughout the day for yourself, even if it's just 15-20 minutes or before or after classes, before or after work. Just getting into the habit of setting aside that time. I usually try at night to start getting ready for bed about 8:30, and then I go to my room and I read whatever I need to read. And that's the thing I do before I go to bed, partly because I know looking at screens before I go to bed affects my circadian rhythms and affects my sleep patterns, and I don't want that. But it's also a way for me to relax a little bit and to take some time for myself. If you're reading content for school, it might not necessarily be, again, relaxing, but I do recommend that you set that time aside. And if you're reading a physical piece of text, it's good to have a pen or highlighters next to you. If you are reading online, which most of us are doing a lot of these days, you might have like we do for this class. I also keep a notebook for those. I'm currently taking some grad school classes online, and there's lots of reading, lots of PDFs. We don't have a ton of physical textbooks, but I keep a notebook of everything that I find important. And sometimes, if I'm able, I copy paste and put notes in my text on my screen so that I remember. For me, the act of actually writing things out as I read helps me absorb an idea better and helps me remember it. So as you are starting to read, you're going to take a quick look at the text in advance, maybe take a look at the headline, take a look at the subheadings, see who wrote it, and see when it was written. Usually we're aiming for pieces that are more current. So especially as you get into areas that require research, we know that research is constantly evolving and new theories are coming out all the time. So being able to read something that is current is better, and start to then be able to communicate with the text. This is sometimes called dialogic. It's basically meaning that you're having a dialogue with the text. Obviously, this is usually quiet, but you're able to kind of connect with the text and go, oh, I never thought about it that way, or I don't see where you're going here, or I don't agree with that point. So as you begin to read, you start to form some context of what you're reading. So again, look at the title, look at the author. If you don't know who the author is, it might benefit you to do a little bit of Googling who that person is, find out their credentials, their affiliations. Then start to ask yourself, okay, who is this piece written for? Is it written for college professors? Is it written for politicians? Is it written for the general public? And ask yourself what you already know about this topic. You already know what the term happiness means. You know that you are encouraged to pursue it, but you might not be familiar with that term of hygge. You might not be familiar with some of the other Scandinavian terms that some of these articles reference. So being able to ask yourself, okay, what do I know about it? How do I feel about it? And what can I learn about it? So look at that title. Usually the title will give you an idea of the thesis of the piece or the author's argument. See if there's any headnotes, including any information in the piece about who the author is. And if there isn't any, you can again Google. And sometimes, especially if you're reading textbooks, there will be journal prompts and discussion questions often at the end of a story or an article, or sometimes at the beginning. And those can help direct you in ways to think about the piece. Then you start to read it, and ask yourself as you're reading through the piece, why is the author saying this? What's the importance of it? As you start to go through it, you might encounter references that you're unfamiliar with, words or vocabulary that you don't know, or things that are just confusing. And if that happens, especially if you are keeping a notebook or a physically writing in the text, being able to underline, question mark, to be able to go back to those. When I was in college, I wrote in everything, so I usually didn't get the chance to sell a lot of my books back because I had written in them too much, but it was my way of interacting and better understanding them. But again, you can keep a notebook for that too. Start to directly have that dialogue or communication with the text. And again, you can directly question it. You don't have to agree with the information that's presented. In fact, you might not. You might not be convinced by the end of the article or the piece that you agree with it. And if that's the case, what you want to be able to do is start to understand why. Is it because you didn't like the tone, the word choice that the author used? Is it because you felt like they didn't provide enough information or evidence? Because you did not trust the author and their credentials? So start to ask yourself what you agree with and why. Connect it to things you've already read or already know about the topic that you're reading about. Maybe you are currently watching a television show or you're listening to a podcast and it makes you go, oh, that reminds me, I was just listening to a podcast about depression, and especially how people get more depressed in the wintertime because of the waning daylight hours, and also because it can affect our ability to be active and be outside. So I can start to connect, okay, the opposite of happiness is sadness, and that links to depression and anxiety. And so when are the times when people feel most unhappy, and when are the times when people feel most happy? And hopefully, if the writer's doing a good job, you can start to visualize things that they're explaining as you read it. When I'm looking at some of the pieces on hygge, often there are references to coziness, and they explain it by talking about, a roaring fire and a cozy blanket and a hot steaming cup of tea or coffee. And so you start to get these mental images, and your brain starts to connect better with the material. And if there are any graphics, charts, visuals, pay attention to those too, because they're trying to say something as well. So I have some, if I can pull it up, and I will link this on Blackboard, some information on just how you can start to be a more active reader and questions that you can start to ask and answer as you read. This is not a required assignment, but it is a way for you to start to, again, understand more about what you're reading, connect with it, and to remember it better. This will also be useful as you get to assignments where you're required to do research, where you're required to cite sources, to summarize sources. So here's some ideas as you read. Underline, circle, check mark, put question marks. Again, if you can't do it on the text itself, keep a notebook or keep a document on your laptop where you can start to keep track of those things. And then some questions to answer. In my face-to-face classes, we do this exercise together in class. I give them a piece of writing and I have them answer those questions. But I will post this for you so that you can see what some of those are. And they're basically what I talked about as I went through that PowerPoint, which I will also post. So we will definitely get more into doing research and being able to reference sources in our essays. But as you start to think about this first essay, what happiness means to you and how you're going to define it, again, you might find that you want to read externally, read information about the topic for yourself. And these active reading strategies can be really helpful to help you connect ideas, to think more broadly about a topic, and to think more critically about what you're reading and why you like it, why you don't, and whether it's useful to you. So that's a bit on analytical or critical reading, and I hope that helped.